All right, good evening, everyone. I want to warmly welcome you to March series for the year 2023. This is a March series organized for our parenting support community, and it's been put together by Faith Ministry. Faith Ministry is a faith-based NGO that is shouldered with the responsibility of raising godly seeds in this generation. In some moments, we're going to have our first guest for this series this year coming back into the room, and we will commence the session right away. In some moments, we're going to have a first guest for this year coming back into the room, and we commence the session right away.
There we are.
Oh, great.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Great. And good day, Dr. Cassie.
Lovely to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. We're grateful to have you participate as one of our guest speakers for this series. And we're grateful to have you in. So very briefly, our participant, I will just say a couple of things about Dr. Cassie before we get started. All right.
Do you want me to say a few things?
No, I'm going to be taking
you're
a
going. Okay.
from this end.
Okay.
Right. So Dr. Cassie she got her first degree in Master of Education and Doctorate of Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. That's in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And she's currently a senior lecturer at Elliott Preston Department of Child Study and Human Development. Our main interest is in parent-child relations, and I'm sure she can speak to the discussion we have for this evening. Tonight we want to look at, Dr. Cassie, it's evening here in Nigeria, so I'm saying tonight. Okay, so we're going to be looking at a very important discourse that I believe that parents need to learn from, but learn a lot from. And the discourse borders on the brain development at the teenage age range. The challenge here is that many parents find the teenage years, it's kind of bumpy for many families because the children are now trying to establish their own identity. A lot is taking place in terms of their development, but many parents are not aware that a lot actually takes place in the brain as well. A lot takes place in the brain, and many things that we see the teenagers do, they are the result of what goes on in the brain. So what we want to spend tonight doing is to, for some moment, understand what the brain development is like during the teenage years and what that means for parents, so that parents can offer appropriate help to their children, and then their interaction gets better, and they're able to help them develop as they should and transition, transit into adulthood in the best way and manner that they can. So participants, please join me as I welcome Dr. Mary Cassie as she takes us through this session tonight. Thank you so much, Doctor. We're grateful to have you join us tonight.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Okay, so can I share my, you have to let me share my screen.
Yes, you should be able to do that.
Okay. No, it says you've disabled it.
Right, okay. Just a moment.
I'm delighted to be here. Okay, so can I share my, you have to let me share my screen.
Yes, I'm working to get that done.
No, it says you've disabled it.
Right. Okay. Yes, you can check now, please.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
I can see from my end. I believe other person should be able to see as well.
All right. Then let me go to this. And we're going to play from the start.
You can check now.
Okay. Okay. Pull this over here. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. If you have questions, I'm happy to see the screen. Take some of them along the way. You don't all have to wait till the very end. But let me go. So, sorry, let me go back here. I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back here. So what I'm going to talk with you about today is some of what I call the joys and challenges of parenting an adolescent. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is the transition from childhood to young adulthood. So, let's just get started. So, what do we mean? A Parent's Guide to Raising an Adolescent. So I'm not even sure if many of you know when adolescence begins, because there's a lot of discussion about that in the research community. But for most of us, we think that adolescence, and this is very culturally bound. So I'm not exactly sure how you think of it, how you might think of it in Nigeria, but for many researchers, I would say for most of us, I think that this is a very culturally bound question. When does it actually begin? Does it begin, 8, 9, 10? When does it begin? So does it begin at 11, 12, 13? What age does it actually begin? What we do know is that it for most cultures across the world, it is becoming younger and younger, so that what we think of as adolescent tasks are actually, starting to show up a little bit younger than it ever has been before. So whatever age it is that you feel it begins, let's just say that in terms of the biological changes, we're talking about puberty. So if you think about adolescence as beginning with puberty, then those are the biological changes that happen in a child's body. And that's going to happen somewhere around, it used to be 11, 12, 13, 14, and it's now we're seeing puberty beginning as early as 10 for some children. So here we have, here's the confusion that some people might feel about what is adolescence. When does it end? There's another good question. I teach at a university, and I have undergraduates who are, many of them are as old as young as 17, 18, and some of them are as old as 21 and 22. I think that adolescence, while we call that young adulthood, I think that a lot of what goes on, in the adolescent period can extend easily into the early 20s. Let's see. So one of the questions that I really want you all to think about, for the most part, is if you're thinking about this as a parent, I want you to think about what is it that you fear most about adolescence. And by fear, I mean, what is it that you fear maybe for your children? What is it that it might be contributing to some kind of fear that you have about what they're facing in the world? I know that a lot of parents here in the United States have a lot of fears about it, have quite a few fears about what that means for their children in a very changing world, in a world that's getting smaller and smaller all the time, in terms of its global impact. So that's a question I want you to consider and think about as we're talking today. And then what do you most look forward to as a parent of a teen? I love to ask this question of parents, because a lot of parents think of adolescence as, oh my gosh, like it was easy when they were children. I have no idea what I'm doing in adolescence. So, so just be thinking about those questions. And Samuel, if somebody comes up with a question in the chat, just let me know, okay? Let's see.
All right, I'll do that.
Okay. So I think of adolescence, it's definitely a time of great change. And there are new risks, but there are also new opportunities. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both. So, and the changes, as I already started to say, some of the changes have to do with their bodies. So, what do you notice, for example, from childhood into adolescence? Well, clearly their bodies are changing dramatically, right? We see, we see a lot of development. We see growth in height. We see body hair growing. We see breasts developing. So I like to tell this story often that when I'm talking about adolescents, that for adolescents who don't necessarily see the changes that we see in them, that it can be a little disconcerting for them when someone they meet will say, oh my goodness, I wouldn't even recognize you. The last time I saw you, you were very, very small, or you were very tiny, or I wouldn't even know you. And that can be a little disconcerting because to the adolescent hasn't changed at all. So some of the changes that we see are definitely their bodies, right? Let's see. Why is this not working? Okay, for some reason it's not showing up. What's wrong here? Oh, there it is. Yeah, so who are you? Like, this is another thing that parents will often say, like, who are you and what have you done with my child? Even some parents don't recognize what's going on for their children in adolescence, right? And like a typical question that I get is, what happened to my child? The one who used to cuddle, who would sit closely to me, who would actually listen to me? What happened to that child? So there's so many changes going on that I'm still not sure. Here we are. And then here's another question. How do we raise our children to be and to feel safe in a world that feels increasingly unsafe? So it's a time of great change. There's changes in their bodies. There's changes in their brains. There's certainly a lot of change in the intensity of feelings. The relationships with parents are often changing. Their participation in their social culture is changing, and the way that they imagine the future. This last question is very important to me. How do we raise our children to be and to feel safe in a world that feels increasingly unsafe? That's a question that I think I even sense in my own students, where the world can feel like a very unsafe place to them. All right. So Samuel asked me to address what's going on with the brain. So let me explain a little bit about the changes in the brain. There are basically 4 major changes that happen in the brain for adolescents, but I'm going to try to make this a little simple and talk to you about 2 basic systems of change. One is the prefrontal cortex, which you can see over here. It governs thinking and decision making. So it's at the front of the brain. The limbic system is at the back. Okay? And that governs emotional drives. And so if you wanted to see a close-up of the limbic system, which is actually here, this is more the close-up of what's going on in here. The cerebellum, the amygdala, the thalamus, cerebral cortex, all of these pieces contribute to the emotional drive, the limbic system, which governs emotional drives. So the prefrontal cortex is most of the development of the cortex occurs during adolescence. It continues to occur at the start of adolescence, and it continues over the course of adolescence, and so into young adulthood. So you might think of it as being pretty much developed sort of in our 20s, 18 to 20. The limbic system is that governs this particular area. The prefrontal cortex governs our ability to plan ahead. For example, your capacity to plan ahead. It controls impulses, organizes actions. It helps us evaluate risks. So this part, right, evaluating risks. The limbic system, however, which governs emotional drives, that starts to develop earlier, much earlier than the prefrontal cortex. And herein lies the problem for a lot of adolescents. It's largely responsible for emotional drives with a new energy that may overload the system. For example, it drives our desire for food. It drives fear, a sense of what leads kids to snap and to fight really quickly instead of weighing the possibility. Should I get into this fight? Should I not? A kid called me a name. A kid insulted my family. What do I do? Do I fight? Do I run? And certainly it is driving sex and sexual desires, sexual interest, sexual impulses. We as adults we really have to consider the connection between these 2 systems. It's the coordination of the 2 systems that leads to the ability, eventually, to monitor and control behavior and to process emotions. So let me just give you an example. So the limbic system, because our emotional drives are developing before the prefrontal cortex, it means that often adolescents are finding themselves confronted with impulses that are really strong. And what would make them stop and consider some kind of an action or a decision that are they going to follow the crowd into something that could be risky, or are they going to be cautious? That is governed by their capacity for decision making. So if you've got a heightened emotional drive going, sometimes we don't make good decisions. So the kind of examples of that would be kids who, don't make good decisions about drinking or, taking drugs or using drugs, or decisions about, involving themselves in very high risk behaviors. So the timing of the brain maturation is different, and that's what causes the problem. So an immature prefrontal cortex is not going to provide sufficient cognitive control of behavior, right? So if it's still developing, it's not very strongly developed, it's not very well developed, it's going to be weaker in helping a child, an adolescent, especially a young adolescent, make what we would call a wise decision, right? As my mother often used to say, you can't put a wise head on, a wise brain on a young head. It doesn't work that way, right? Wisdom comes from living. the more we live, the more we learn about, things that we do, decisions that we make, and the consequences of those decisions. Young adolescents who are have very strong emotional drives are not usually as concerned about the consequences. And part of that has to do with the fact that they feel invincible. Nothing's going to happen to me. Why would I think that that would happen to me? They actually do really believe that they're in control. So that leads them to take greater and greater risks. So they have again, an undeveloped prefrontal cortex means you're going to have a heightened response to reward. Oh, wow, if I do this, look what I get. And immature behavior control. So what does that mean? Behavioral inhibition could be weaker. Like in other words, an adolescent might be able to say, my mom told me not to do this, or the principal at school said you shouldn't do X. I shouldn't get involved there. I know that that could be trouble. They can know that. They can know those things. They can know that as fact. I could actually have a group of, and I did this. I was a middle school teacher first before I moved into university. I mean, I could tell my students all of the facts. Here's what'll happen if you drink too much. Here's what'll happen if you, get involved in this kind of activity. It can start you down a road you don't want to go down. They can know that. And but if their inhibition is weaker, like the emotional allure of the moment can actually override that. It can override factually what they know. Didn't you know that you might get caught? Yes, I did know I might get caught, but I went with it anyway. I was here in the moment. My friend said, let's go do this thing. Here's a common one. Young adolescents, at least in this country, are sometimes really caught up in the excitement, believe it or not, the excitement of shoplifting at a store. That's it's like dancing with danger. It can be very exciting. It can be like, wow, like very exciting. And so they'll push the limits on it. Like, how far can I go? They will judge it to be not a really serious thing. In other words, no one's going to get hurt. So I can remember adolescents that I was teaching one time bragging one day about all of the things that they shoplifted from a store. And when I confronted them, of course, they were very, oh my gosh, I got in trouble. We're going to get in trouble. But when I asked them about it, they were like, well, no one's going to get hurt. This isn't life or death. So the idea that it was wrong, that wasn't consequence enough. It still, was still kind of exciting to get away with it. Like, and then they were bragging about how they got away with it, like putting things in their pockets or, distracting the shop owner while somebody else stole something and ran out the door. And it might not even be things they needed. It was just the excitement of doing it. That's a really, really good example of a common way that a common occurrence in adolescence, that where kids get very excited by dancing with danger, dancing with a little bit of risk. The problem becomes when those risks become more serious and they still are not making good decisions. So when their behavioral inhibition is weaker, some adolescents are going to increase their desire for that novel sensation thinking. I've never done this before. This is a pretty cool thing. And it's always, always, always heightened when they're with their peers. So, making sense to you all, I hope. All right, let's see. So these two things, I think, are the most important things, like pieces of brain structure and function that I can offer you right now without getting like really too in depth into what each one of these does. Understanding the connection, the relationship between emotional drive and thinking and decision making, the prefrontal cortex is really essential. Okay. Here's another thing that we should, know about adolescence, that it is considered by most people to be a very serious period of experimentation. And that was this idea of experimentation was really introduced to us by Erik Erikson, who is most famous for identity identity development and his identity development theory. So a lot of what's going on in this period of experimentation is connected to the capacities of the brain for increased cognitive functioning, right? So here's something. So adolescence, period of experimentation, it's fueled, and I'm going back now to the limbic system here. It's fueled by intensity of feelings and new ways of thinking. Like, wow, there's a whole new sense of possibility. So one word I would have you think about is the word agency. In adolescence have, children who are becoming adolescents have a lot more room to make their own decisions. They have more agency. Parents give them more permission. For example, I teach a class here at Tufts called Parent-Child Relations. And in that class, at the very beginning of the year, I asked them to tell me something about their experience of being parented. And so many of the students in that class are themselves, as I said before, 17 and 18. But they will talk about ways that they were frustrated by their parents. So, and some of this has to do with gender, where the young men in the class might say that they had more freedom than some of their female counterparts. And then the young women will say, well, things like, I wanted to stay out later at night. These are the common ones. I want to stay out later at night. I don't want that early curfew. Where some of the young men said that they had later curfews than their sisters. So as we get into adolescence, adolescents want to experiment more in their lives. They want to experience more in their lives. They don't want to simply take their parents' word for it. When I was your age, this is what happened. They want to feel it and understand it for themselves. And that leads them to want to, experience it, go out and try new things. And of course, what we are always concerned about is making sure that they try new things in a safe way. So it's fueled by intensity of new feelings and new ways of thinking. They also have new physical capacities. So they have greater muscle control. They're more developed, they have a greater developed musculature. They also need more sleep, by the way. So that's often like as their bodies are changing and changing into more muscle, and they're developing in that way, they also, that's taxing them. They need greater sleep. Unfortunately, I don't know what it is like in Nigeria, but I know in the United States, I think sometimes our kids are so over booked, they're overscheduled, that they don't have adequate time for sleep. You don't have adequate time for sleep, the brain doesn't have time to rest, and anxiety can begin to develop. A whole host of things can happen to the brain and to the body when we don't take care of it. But here again, I hope you're getting the idea that a lot of what I teach when I talk about adolescence is the need for balance, right? We need to give adolescents the chance to use these new physical capacities, but we also need them to do it wisely. And that's not always an easy thing. Adolescents, because they look different, they find themselves appealing to people in a new way. Girls are noticed by boys are noticed by girls. And that's also a new way that they have to get that in their heads, like what is going on here. I'll give you a really good example of what this looks like at a young age. I had a young boy in my class. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. That's middle school here. And so the youngest kids that I had in that class, one of them was 11 in the 6th grade. So 11 and 12, 13, so that kind of age. And this young boy, his name was Paul. He was really very, very fine student and a very serious student. And the girls thought of him as cute. That was their word for him. He was cute. He was he had a very boyish face, very young, boyish looking face. But by the 8th grade, so that was in the 6th grade, he was kind of short and he was a little a little heavy, but not quite, and just very, very round face, always happy, and very, very strong student. He was probably the best student I had in the class that year. Very straight A student. By the 8th grade, he had grown at least 3 inches. He was much taller. He had slimmed down dramatically, which is not at all uncommon in adolescence. He was very muscular in appearance. And all of a sudden, he wasn't the cute little boy anymore. He was a boy that, a young man that the girls were really very attracted to. So as he was getting all these messages from the girls around him, he had a harder time focusing on education, on his education. And his mother came to see me one day, and she said, I am seeing that he's not as serious about his studies anymore. And I just had to laugh. And she said, what are you laughing at? I said, there's nothing wrong with him. It's just that the girls have discovered him. You know, and then she just kind of laughed and nodded. So the point of the story here is that his new physical appearance all of a sudden thrust him into a new place of relationships with his peers. And it was confusing to him. It was exciting. It was very exciting to him, but it was also a little confusing. So he wasn't, of course, spending as much time on his academics as he had been. I mean, you know, it balances out. He comes back to that at a certain point, but there was a period of time when he wasn't. So that's, and there you go. So they have some old friends. They're going to keep some old friends, and then they're going to meet new friends. And that also, by the way, this transition from old friends to new friends, or dropping some old friends and making room for new friends, that can be really difficult for some kids. So, you know, we've always been best friends, but now you've found a new group of people to hang out with. What's especially true in this period of time is that I'm going to give you this word. It's a word that I think is synonymous with adolescence, and that's asynchronous. So synchrony is that everything kind of develops at the same pace and the same time. Asynchrony is that it's not. It's like the emotional part is very developed, the cognitive part is underdeveloped. In adolescence, particularly as you're shifting from childhood into early adolescence, sometimes you'll have young, especially this is very true of girls in general, not all girls, but on average, girls develop much more quickly than boys. So you might have girls that are very developed biologically. They've gone through puberty early, and you have some boys that still look like they are in the 4th or 5th grade. They're very, very young. So that asynchrony can say to some kids like, oh, I'm not going to hang out with you anymore. I have new friends. And that can be really difficult. Socially, that can be really difficult for kids. So there's a lot going on here. And they're experimenting with their new look and their new friends. They also have a new capacity for perspective taking, which is getting back to the cognitive piece. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but this one is really important, this new capacity for perspective taking. And let me see what else I have here. And exploring identity and the sensational allure of risk taking. So let me pause here for a second, because I want to talk about these last 3: capacity for perspective taking, exploring identity, and the allure of risk taking. So as I said, Erik Erikson talks about adolescence as a time of deciding who they want to be, how they want to explain who they are in the world. And a lot of that has to do with testing out who they are in their new form. I look different. I don't sound you can hear this, especially among young men, their voices change. So you cannot miss how different they are from when they were children. So the question, the age-old identity question is, who am I? You know, that kids are trying to figure out who they are, what they love, what they value, who they want to be, how they want to be seen in the world. How do they want to be seen in the world? That's a really big one. Do they want people to see them as the way they've always been? Do they want to see, they want people to see them as standing for something? A lot of what happens in adolescent identity formation is that kids will try on different hats. That's another way of saying it. So, and in this time of experimentation, they go into a period of what's called moratorium. They run with one gang, they run with a different gang. Do I want to be a sports person? Am I going to stay with people who are athletes? Can tend to get that as an identity. I'm an athlete. And then what happens to the athlete who happens to also to really love school? Here, they would be called, if you're just into being an athlete, you could be called a jock. Or if you are into being a serious student, you could be called a nerd. So kids have these names where they stereotype you and throw you into this kind of bucket. And in identity formation, kids, many adolescents push back against those buckets. Like, I'm not just that one person. I'm not just, a math person. I'm not just, an athlete. I can be a student athlete. I can be many different things. So that period of experimentation is really important, where they try figuring out, who I want to be in the world. I did a study once with some gang members in Boston, adolescent gang members, and one of them, who I really came to respect deeply, was talking to me about gang activity. And Erik Erikson made a comment in some of his early work. He talked about positive identity choices and negative identity choices, which comes to risk taking. Negative identity choice, the allure of the gang. So being part of a gang and being part of, like, gangs here would wear hats and very kind of visible identities. And it's like a sense of belonging. I want to belong. To whom do I belong? So there's a separation that begins from parenting, from families, which leads me back to that comment about that I said earlier, like, who are you and what happened to my child? A lot of parents will say to me, I don't even recognize my son anymore. I don't recognize my daughter in adolescence, because they don't seem to be the same children they were. Well, they don't seem to be the same children they were because they are the same person, but they are different. They are also different. So this young man who was part of a gang told me that there were, I was talking with him about his choices. And he said, you think it's a choice to be a part of a gang? And I said, it isn't. And he said, not here. You are a part of a gang or you don't belong. So the only choice you have, in his neighborhood, this was true. He said, the only choice you have is what gang you want to belong to. And for him, choosing a gang that was not a violent gang was the best choice. And I asked him how he came to make that decision. Why did he choose that one? And really what he said is the influence of his mother, that he was very, very close to his mother, and he respected his mother for giving him the room he needed to make his own decisions and his own choices. But that her caution was always there. Like, I love you. He said, I've never doubted her love. Even when I've made mistakes, I've never doubted her love. So, it's not rocket science. I think a lot of people think that there are these keys there are these steps we have to take. There's a guidebook that we have to follow, and we have to do a lot of extraordinary things to keep our adolescents, keep a good relationship with our adolescents. And I don't think that's always true. Sometimes it's the simple things, as it was for this young man who said just her giving him, the room he needed to explore, but not so much room that he got hurt. It's really powerful memory for me of working with him. Okay, so this exploration is really important in terms of identity. So a couple of things that I want to tell you in terms of, let me see where my next slide is taking us. Yeah. So the power of social relationships in adolescent decision-making. So I believe this is the Nigerian flag. I tried to find an image that was really depicting young people in Nigeria. And I love this one. I came across this one and I love it because you see just the whole range of students. You see the range of faces and, you know, what it means to be in a crowd, what it means to be identified, you know, and to be proud. And they look very proud to me. But the power of social relationships and decision-making. So let's go back to decision-making for a minute. The first thing that I want to talk about that happens is that in adolescence, in terms of their cognition, is that they are aware of possibilities. Wow, I have choices. And the possibilities means that they can move easily between abstract thinking and concrete observations in order to generate possibilities. So for example, they can look at what is right now, where am I right now? And what if I want to go to college? Here's where I am right now. Here's what my grades are. I want to go to college. What do I have to do to get there? So they can say, here's what is concretely my experience right now. And then they can imagine what they need to do. They can generate possibilities. Younger children don't do that. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Younger children don't do that. They are capable of hypotheticals. If I do X, then Y will happen. So they can consider ways in which their lives might be affected by a particular career choice, for example. I mean, I had a student in here the other day who was doing exactly that. If I pursue graduate school when I graduate from here, then I will be on my way to my career as a social worker. But if I do that, I'm very tired and I feel like I need a break from school. If I do that, I'm not sure I will do my best academic work. That's a good example of hypothetical. Other examples of hypotheticals have to do with risk taking, which is really where we want them to apply it. If it sounds like a good idea to follow my friends down this road, but if I do, what might happen? You know, that's a really important piece. What might happen if I follow them? Okay. Abstract concepts, they begin to get metaphor. They understand, they can reason in their minds about things that are well beyond their experience. I teach classes in moral development, and we use hypothetical dilemmas to get the kids to think about in abstract ways about what might happen, what should happen. You know, what would you do, for example, this happens to kids all the time. What would you do if you saw a classmate being bullied in the hallways of school? What would you do? What should you do? That kind of thing. That kind of thinking greatly facilitates the growth of social cognition, really does. Okay, so possibilities, they can also, and then there's abstract concepts. This is also possible with the adolescent brain. And then thinking about thinking. This is really important. They can actually think about what they were thinking. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. Young children, if you ask a young child, let's say that you have a young child who, to tell you a little bit about themselves. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I do this with very young children all the time. So a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old might say, I live in this particular town. I have a mommy, I have a daddy, I have a sister, I have a brother, I have a dog. I'm on a team. I play soccer, I play football, I play a sport. They list a whole pile of things that make up who they are in their lives. It's things they have or things they do. That's who. If you ask an adolescent to tell you something about themselves, they might say, well, I think I'm pretty outgoing. I think I'm a good friend. I think I'm very different from everybody else in my family. I don't know if you can hear the difference, but they have a capacity to take a perspective on themselves, to think about their own thinking in ways that young children don't. Here's another example. If you ask a young child, like a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, you have one child hits another child on the playground at school. And so the teacher brings the children in and says to the child who hit someone else, "Why did you do that?" And so the child says, "Well, she kicked me." So you have a little bit more conversation and you say, "Well, what were you thinking? Didn't you know you would get in trouble? What were you thinking?" Think about the question. What were you thinking? Didn't you think you would get in trouble? And you might imagine what the kid would say. "Well, I wasn't, she kicked me." That's what the kid will come back with. The child will say, "She kicked me." Um, they don't really have the capacity to think about what they were thinking. And the further away you get from it, if you ask the child the next day to tell you what happened the day before, what you would get is really a factual account. This child kicked me and I hit her. And that's it. You might get, "Well, yes, it made me mad." But you won't get, "Did you think about what might happen?" That's not what you would get. Whereas if you ask an adolescent, "Why did you shoplift?" "I don't know, I was with my friends. Seemed like a good thing to do at the time." "Did you think about getting caught?" "Yes, I thought about getting caught, but I thought it was still, what's the big deal? We're not hurting anything." They can actually recall the history of the event. They can say what led up to it, not just what happened, but they can tell you what they were feeling and thinking at the time. That's a major shift that happens in adolescence. We don't see that in early childhood. We don't even see it in late childhood. We see it really emerging in adolescence. The capacity to think about their own thinking. It's like metacognition. So it's a big cognitive transition right there that's going on. It's a very important transition, and it's really big. And there are also a few other things about what's going on here with social relationships. Adolescents are very, very egocentric. What do I mean by that? There's alongside of the idea that nothing can happen to me. That's what, again, remember the limbic system. So emotions are driving this. So this is exciting. Of course, I'm going to go to this gathering. Of course, I'm going to go to this protest. Nothing will happen to me. I'll be just fine. They don't think anything. They don't worry about the world in the way that other people might worry. Adults might worry about the world. They don't think that anything bad is ever going to happen to them. They don't imagine that if they are with friends who are drinking and driving, that they're going to have an accident. They are willing to take that risk because they kind of think they're invincible. They also think that their experiences are unique. This is happening to me. It's not happening to anybody else. Everybody else here is happy. Everyone else here, the level of insecurity that goes on that lives among adolescents is actually really high. They're very, very sensitive. They're sensitive to how they look. They're extremely self-conscious. We call that, in psychology, we call that the imaginary audience. And it goes something like this. I know I went to school today and my hair was, I actually heard a young woman say this, that her hair was not perfect. Everybody is laughing at me. Everybody thinks I look ridiculous. I know everybody was looking at me. And then she finds out later, of course, that nobody even noticed. Or kids who will not wear certain clothes to school anymore because they're not cool. Which puts a huge burden, by the way, on parents who don't have enough money to buy, all of the cool things that a lot of kids want. This is where the media comes in and plays a huge role. Huge role. Okay. So the belief, there's a sense of this, everybody's watching. And that's not necessarily true, but that's what they think. So where are we going here? So what I really want you to know about they are able to take, there are multiple dimensions that they're able to take into consideration. And here's, some of what goes on between parents and children now is that they can argue, and they will argue a lot. While they have a more sophisticated, and this is kind of what it looks like, right? Like you can see the disgust on the face, like, oh my God, she's not listening to me. All right, here's another one. Like pleading their case. Like, why are you not listening to me? So you have, a father talking to a son. You see the son's hands up. Why aren't you, pleading his case? The young woman on the couch is like, oh, and her mom, they're not talking at all. Like, okay, that ended poorly. And then you have another young man pleading his case to his mother, right? Or you have the typical lecture going on, right? Or you have, I'm not listening to you. And kids get to this point of not listening when they feel like I've heard this over and over and over and over again. Like, you're not listening to me, so I'm not listening to you, And then you have parents who fight, right? And they're all, so they're fighting it with each other. And you've got the kid in the middle saying, this is when parents disagree. And oftentimes parents disagree because neither one of them is getting the desired result from their kid, from their child. What's going on here is that adolescents have a capacity for greater understanding, and they feel like their parents often don't acknowledge that. A lot of what leads to arguments is that there is a lag. Often adolescents don't have the necessary organizational skills. They're not always reading social cues accurately, but they do have the capacity to have a perspective on life, and they don't feel often that their parents are really acknowledging that. They don't. Our parents will say, this is the way you should do it, where adolescents are saying, I don't know, that depends. There are many possibilities in life. Just because you say this is the consequence, it doesn't mean that that's going to happen. They can be very skeptical. They seem to think that most things in life are uncertain. That can give rise to fear, and that nothing is completely reliable. And the worst thing that parents can do in this period of time is try to push through that and say, look, it is this way because I said so. That's a shutdown line. Why should I do this? Because I said so. And you've got adolescents who are saying, well, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm not going to pay attention to that. All right, that stops conversation. That is not what we want to do with parenting. We don't want to stop the conversation. We want to keep the conversation going. Right? So, this is what it looks like in, when we're children. It's easy when they're children because they listen to us. Right? I love this picture because it shows the humor. So you've got a mom who is making her point, but you've got a kid who's laughing, that obviously says, okay, somewhere in there, she's got a point, but so do I. And obviously she's listening enough because he doesn't seem very angry, right? There is a lot of room for this kind of connection between parents and adolescents, a lot. But it begins, by adolescents, by parents who are willing to listen and to say sometimes they're wrong, that they don't always get it. That they've forgotten what it was like to be their age, or to, fear in the way that they fear. Or, I think when I think about adolescence, I think about it as, and I say this to my students, in my class, I will do everything I can to keep you safe, happy, and healthy. So like, not on my watch. But that means, then I have students who push the buttons all the time. They don't get assignments in on time. They're late. They'll try to give me some kind of excuse that I know is a lie. And then I will have to say to them, I would just tell me the truth. Just tell me the truth. Nothing horrible is going to happen to you. I will listen to you. And you can see them start to respond. Okay, I just didn't plan my time well and I didn't get it in. Thank you. Now we have a different kind of relationship. We have much more of a collaborative relationship, much more of a caring and trusting relationship. When authority of parenting is, distributed in such a way that I'm the word, I'm the last word, you do as I say, it doesn't work for almost all adolescents. Adolescents are they're very resilient. They're very resourceful, and they know how to get around it. So they can go quiet, they can get angry, they can leave. But, these images are very much possible for parenting in adolescence, right? So and I want to leave time for questions. So my advice, the brakes don't work as well as the engines in their brains. In other words, they're going to move. The brakes would be their cognitive capacity, their prefrontal cortex. The engine is the emotion. So we have to know that when you're a parent, you got to know that emotions are driving it. So reasoning with them is not always the only effective way. You certainly should reason with them, but you also have to acknowledge that their emotions are running high. They need both structure. They do need structure. Routines, I really am a believer of routines. They definitely need structure, and they also need independence. We have to let them, give them a little bit more room to experience the world on their own and not always be afraid, that bad things are going to happen to them. Parents we all need to accept that our kids may not be ready to make consistently mature decisions. In other words, they're going to make a few decisions that are not good. Now, how not good is really the question. Like, how far do we let them go before we say this is now dangerous? How far? And I think that that's different for every parent. I don't think that there's just one rule of thumb, but you figure it out with your son, your daughter. That's what I think. Our adolescents are practicing to be adults. They're practicing to be us. So remember the mistakes you made. They're going to make mistakes, and we need to be a little bit patient with them. We have to understand that their peers are increasingly their point of reference. In other words, they'd rather be with peers than they would rather be with parents. That's not an easy thing for some parents to understand or to accept. They want to go back to the days when, they were young, the children were young and wanted to stay home. I had a parent last week say to me, she never stays home and she never watches movies. We used to have a family movie night, a family film night. She's never here for that. And they're taking it as a rejection. And it's actually not a rejection. It's just, there are other things out there she wants to experience. They'll come back. They always do. Our role as parents is to support and protect. And that can be really difficult, especially when they make it difficult for us to do that. So to the students who don't, for example, this is just even as a faculty member, and I do this a lot in my parent-child class. I said, in this class, this may seem a little odd to hear, but I'm trying to be a good parent. If you are having trouble, you need to come and tell me because I can't read your mind. But adolescents who think they're invincible think they take too long to ask for help. I can do it. I can do it on my own. I can do it on my own. And they're not good judges of that often. And so then it goes too far down the road and they're too far in the hole and they can't get out. So it can be difficult even when you want to support and protect them. Sometimes they work against you. Listen. I love this phrase. God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should be doing more listening than speaking, and especially during adolescence. And again, be cautious about tying our love to approval of them. In other words, we may not approve of what they do, but we still love them. That's really important. And they need to know that. They need to know they can fail and that you're still going to love them. That's really, really important. And last, get to know their friends. They shouldn't have friends you've never met. And if they don't want to bring their friends home, there's a reason why they don't want to bring their friends home. If they sense that you've already judged their friends, they may not want to bring them home. That is not a good place for any parent to be. I would rather know their friends, even if I don't like them, than not know them. So that's really important. And then help them take good care of their brains. Let them get good sleep. Insist that they get good sleep. This last one a lot of it has to do with like how much technology they use. We now know, and I could give you another whole talk on this one, but on this topic, but we now know from the specialists who are doing research in the use of technology that young people are on technology much more often than any generation before. That's not a surprise. But the the stimulation to the brain is actually causing a lot of problems. And we're beginning to see those problems. They're not getting enough sleep. They're overstimulated. The brain is not resting. It doesn't go to true REM sleep and rest. They are exhausted. That takes its toll on their bodies, takes its toll on their nutrition, takes its toll on their thinking processes. So that's helping them take good care of their brains. There's a researcher here in Massachusetts who was at Harvard Medical School who talks about the need to get kids to give up the phone at night, where most kids will go to sleep with their phone right beside their heads. You know, put the phone, and they'll say, well, I need it for my alarm clock. Well, put it on the other side of your bed, like make yourself get up and shut it off. That's a very tough battle. The technology battle is really tough. So let's see. So now what? Homework in school, they may not need your help with their homework as much as they did, but you do have to figure out a way to be part of their school lives. So you need to know what's going on, but they may not be coming to you for as much help with their homework. So that might be more difficult for you to figure out. If all you're doing is waiting to get a report card, then you may be missing some things. So again, back to knowing their friends, bringing them around, having them be part of your life. Expectations at home. Are they clear now that they're older? Do they have more chores? Do they have more responsibilities? Do they have choice when it comes to family commitments? These are some of the things that happen on a daily basis for families with adolescents. What are their expectations of members of their community? Do they expect them to be more contributing members? When they become 18, do they expect them, well, I don't know what it is in Nigeria, but here in this country, do they expect them to vote? What's the responsibility of being considered a member of the community? Handling their feelings. How well do we help them handle their feelings? And how do we like when they say things that make us mad, you know, can we step away, take care of ourselves enough so that we can come back to them and be whole? How do we help them handle conflicts with friends? These are the things that are absolutely happening in everyday life for adolescents. Conflicts with friends come up all the time. You know, so here we go. And I'll stop sharing, and now it's your turn. So I don't know if you have any questions, but I think I left enough time for them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cassie. It's awesome going through the slides, and I can tell that we have learned a lot. I can tell that we have picked a lot from this session. And okay, I wouldn't want to keep us for too long. I'm going to ask participants to, if you have any question, please, if you want to raise your hand in Zoom. We're going to be taking questions from the Zoom. There are possible we have other persons watching on the YouTube, but we'll take questions from the Zoom room for now. So if you have any question, please, I would like you to please raise your hand. Raise your hand in the Zoom room, or unmute yourself and talk to us. Anyone with any questions?
You can also put them in the chat if you'd like to.
Yes, that would be fine. I'm able to read it out from there. All right, so while we wait to get any questions from the participants, you know, Dr. Cassie, there's this thing about parents. I know you've touched on it. Parents wanting to, we love our children so much, and we don't want anything wrong. You know, we don't want to go wrong with them. We want them to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And at times it seems as though we go overboard, you know, in a bid to keep them safe. I was just thinking, how do we curate now from the parent side, curate that balance between keeping the children safe and going overboard all in the endeavor of keeping them safe.
Well, tell me something about your community. Like, what are the typical things that might put kids at risk?
Okay, now,
Like where you
definitely
live?
when
Yeah.
yes, peers, peer association,
Okay,
movement
peer
with friends.
association.
Some parents might possibly, maybe not exactly laying their hands on anything, but they probably might perceive their children go out with or is keeping one or two friends that they are probably not fine with,
Mm-hmm.
and they might want to, as much as possible, aside having the child go to school, aside having the child do regular, maybe go to school, go to church, they might want to just keep the child indoor
Mm-hmm.
as much as they can, and not letting the child just fearing in quote. So keeping from friends particularly,
Uh-huh.
so that they don't associate with wrong people.
So keeping kids safe is a tricky thing because a lot of it depends on whether or not they think that they're unsafe. So that's really what the challenge becomes. Do they think that they're unsafe or that they will be? And if they see no danger and you do, that's what creates that impasse. There's nothing dangerous about this. Why are you so upset? Why are you holding me back? So there has to be a different kind of conversation. Like peer, there's a lot to be said about peer pressure, but I actually think that a lot of researchers spend too much time talking about peer pressure and not enough time talking about what makes an adolescent feel confident, right? So I know a lot of adolescents who are very capable of saying, I'm not doing that. That's nuts. I'm not going to go, I'll go this far, but I'm not going to go that far. There are kids who are natural followers. They get kind of pulled in because they want to belong. They don't feel like they belong. And so they're going to go along and try to, do. That's what happens with a lot of bullying. A lot of bullying. So I think in terms of parents and their, so what should the limit of parental oversight and control for teenagers be? That's a great question. I think so the relationship, I know you may not like my answer, but because it depends. It depends on the relationship that a parent has with a growing child to begin with. If there's a trusting relationship there to begin with, and it's open to hearing both sides, if you can go back to the picture that I showed, those pictures of adolescents talking with parents in a way that was either humorous, or there was like, if I could show you with my hands, it would be open hands as opposed to, no, right? Closed hands. So if they think that you are open to hearing their perspective, you have a lot more chance of getting them to do something that you think is reasonable within the limits that you think are safe. That's what I would say to you. If they are willing to if they think you are really willing to listen, and they would say, listen to reason. It means their reason. Doesn't mean that they're always right, by the way, or that they are making a good judgment. And so there are times when we have to step over the limit and say, I know you may not agree with me, and I know you may think I'm being over cautious, or I'm being overprotective, or I'm, taking too much control. But I do not believe that this situation is safe. And being transparent. So there you go. You have to be transparent. That old adage of because I said so goes nowhere with adolescents. It absolutely goes nowhere. And what will happen is the adolescents will keep pushing the line back and saying, you're going too far, you're going too far, you're going too far. And they will listen less and less and less. So the limit of parental oversight, I think, if it's not something that's really putting them at risk, in serious risk, that means that we have to take a risk sometimes and trust that they're making a decent judgment. I think having enough information about what's going on, I wouldn't want to let an adolescent do something that I have no idea about, like who's going to be there. You're going away overnight, who's going to be there? Those kinds of things, knowing the details. But they are more willing to be, I think most adolescents are more willing to be forthcoming with those kinds of details when they feel like you're being reasonable, with what you're allowing them to do. So if I could give you an image, I call it a moving wall. We have to be strong enough that we can hold them back hold the tide of really serious dangers back and keep them behind the wall when that is the case. And we have to be able to move back and let them go forward sometimes and, take a risk that they're making a good judgment. They will fail. The question is, do we, keeping them from failing in very serious and dangerous ways? Sometimes their own failures are the best lessons they could learn. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a great question. And I think every parent has to struggle with how to come to some conclusion about what to do with it. But I really encourage more talking and more listening and more openness and more transparency about why you're doing what you're doing and why you're asking them to follow these rules or these limits or whatever. Like religion is a big one. Kids don't want to go to church anymore. Why don't they not want to go to church? Are you willing to listen to their perspective on that? Kids don't want to do some things that are family traditions anymore. They want to be with their friends. So there needs to be some amount of compromise. You can be with your friends, but this is important. And then, typically it makes them want to stay home more. And that's been my experience, is that it makes students want to be home when they feel like what they have to say is valued. Right? If they don't feel like you value what they have to say, why should they say anything? They're going to just shrug and say, you never listen anyway. So why should I bother? That's not a good place to be with kids. So, and the last thing I'll tell you about it is, in terms of limit setting and controlling, I would use humor as much as you can. Be lighthearted about it rather than being judgmental about it. I know you're not going to like that I'm going to tell you, I want you to do X, but, please do it. I think it's a good thing for you. It's healthy for us, that kind of thing, that kind of language. But don't get me wrong here. There are times when I feel like no is no and should be no. And those times are when I think kids are not making good decisions about what they want to do. And, I can say, I hear you. I hear you've made a good argument. And I still think that this is too dangerous. And the answer is no. So I have no problem with, I think it's worse when parents become too permissive. So any extreme, being too overbearing and being too permissive, doesn't work. So it's finding that balance. It's can be tough. But in all my years of working with adolescents, I have found them to be really very reasonable people most of the time. So, and very interesting, by the way. If you can see the world from their perspective, it's usually pretty cool.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kathy. As we wrap up for tonight, I feel you can touch on this before. I perceive that parents will need to develop certain skills. Of course, the relationship and adolescent must be kept intact. The relationship should be good as possible. But I also feel that certain skills need to be developed. And communication skills. Communication skills, I feel would be very good skills that parents of adolescents need to set. And as well, negotiation skills. How do you come to the table to discuss certain issues and be able to resolve it amicably and both parties are happy? All right, so I don't know if you would have 1 or 2 words to put in on that before we wrap up tonight.
Okay,
session to
Samuel, can you, there's a lot of interference. Can you put that in the chat? Tell me what you want me to say or what you want me to respond to?
Okay.
Oh, now I can hear you better now. There was an awful lot of interference. Now say it again.
Oh, okay. So sorry about that. Yeah, I was saying that I feel parents need to develop certain skills, and
Oh, they do. Yep,
two of those skills, communication skills and negotiation skills. So
right.
if parents can actually communicate properly, of course, as noted earlier, listen and then listen more than they talk, and also negotiate, because I believe as children grow, we need to come to a place where we embrace discussions, we embrace, you know, assessment of issues, we embrace, you know, open criticism, and we all, you know, all parties can look at an issue and objectively make their submission. So I feel parents need to develop those two skills. And I was going to ask I put in one or two words before we bring this session to a stop tonight.
Yeah, I think developing negotiation skills and listening skills, I think that's really important. Okay, really important. But remember that each one of us, we all have to work within our own personalities too, right? So we do need the skills. But for the people who are, and like, again, within those skills, I would say the negotiation skill needs to be, it needs to really work toward or emphasize listening. All right. So listening, because kids get so angry and they'll shut down when they think that's what leads them to do this. You're not listening to me. It's one of the most common things adolescents will say. You know, you never listen. You never listen. That you start to hear that from adolescents, and then you know the relationship is in a rocky place. Like, you never listen. Now, sometimes parents actually are listening, but they can't change the reality. And so it frustrates them, right? So it's a combination of, in terms of the negotiation skill, we have to know the right balance of how much information we share with kids about ourselves, about our own struggles. And, you know, what we need to do to keep them safe, right? So, for example, for families who are struggling economically, you know, and you have kids who go to school and come home and say, you know, I don't have the brand new clothes, or I don't have, you know, the same opportunities as other kids, or, you know, you don't want kids to feel shame, right? So in those homes, I think for the most part, like, I could tell you lots and lots of stories about working with families who are economically struggling, but there's so much love in the home. You know, we can't underestimate, and don't underestimate, you know, the power of love, like genuine love, to know I'm cared for, to know that under no circumstances will that ever be, you know, will that ever be sacrificed. That at the end of the day, that there's a lot of love in the home, and that goes a long way with kids. They're willing to cut parents a lot of slack. They're giving us a lot of room when, you know, when we can show them that ultimately this is what I care most about. Doesn't work all the time, but it works most of the time. So I think the negotiation skills are critical. I think the listening skills are critical. But I also think, so not a but, and I would add, and I think the capacity to be strong in ourselves and to say, you know, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. You can count on me. You can count on my love. You know, you're going to do things that I may not like and I may not agree with. And I'm going to tell you when that's the case, by the way. I will tell you. But that kind of negotiation, being open, that you're right on the money, Samuel, being open, like conveying to an adolescent, I'm open to hearing your point of view. That is critical. That's absolutely critical, because that's the last place you want to get to is you're not listening to me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Francis. We are very grateful. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. We gained so much from your words of knowledge and experience.
No, You are very, very welcome. It's been a joy being with you. I wish that I could, wish we could have done this in person, but I'm delighted to have joined you for this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Well, thank you so much, Mastery. We're going to the session tonight to attend. We're going to be conveyed tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. We're going to be hosting Mr. Miracle. As much as possible, we would like to keep the same links and share.
You're breaking up again. Can you say it a little? Say it.
Okay. I'll just putting out a couple of announcements before we close for tonight.
I didn't hear that last piece, Samuel. Put it in the chat for me. Put it in the chat for me.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. All right, very good. Okay, well, then I will sign off and I wish you all the best and I hope this has been a good conference for you. And I wish you all the best. And feel free to send along any questions at any point in time, okay? Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're very, very welcome. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks so much, participants. We bring the session to close tonight. We reconvene tomorrow morning by 7 a.m. And we're hoping that you're going to have a nice session with Mr. Miracle. He's going to be speaking tomorrow. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. God bless.
Thank you, sir.